What single event in history do you think changed the world the most? Asian man eats bat soup and comes down with COVID-19? Invention of the printing press. It allowed the proliferation and spread of ideas at an exponentially higher rate, and it allowed books to become something the masses could afford. The Enlightenment, and by extension the modern world, never could have happened without it. It represented as big of an information revolution as the internet does today. I remember the History Channel naming Gutenberg the most influential person in history, back when it still was a History Channel. If the Ming Emperor hadn't ushered in a policy of isolation in 1433, the Zheng He, who would die shortly after, and his fleet, the largest in the world at the time, had been able to continue exploring, then the world as we know it would be significantly different, as China was the superpower of the 15th century and it just shut its door on the world. We don't have much detail about the ships in the fleet, but the accounts of Ibn Battuta and Marco Polo make them sound like incredible engineering accomplishments for the time. Discovering electricity. We'd still be using letters for communication. Construction tools wouldn't allow us to build any structure more than 10 or so stories. Spark is a key part of an internal combustion engine, so no cars unless you had a steam engine. A lot more came from the discovery of electricity. There's this neat tool called an MRI, which can find a cancer in your body shortly after it forms, rather than finding it slightly after your death. Invention of antibiotics. Came here to say this. Without antibiotics, the average life expectancy would still be like 45. You get a small cut while tending your garden back in the day, and it could potentially kill you. Vasily Arkhipov's decision to not fire nuclear torpedoes at American submarines. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, Arkhipov was one of the 3 commanders on board his nuclear submarine. In order to use the sub's nuclear weapons, all 3 members had to vote unanimously. Arkhipov's submarine had not received word from Moscow, and U.S. ships were dropping death charges on their submarine, trying to get it to surface. Thinking nuclear war had already broken out, the submarine commanders thought the charges being dropped were intended to sink the sub, and firing on them would be defensive. When it came to a vote, Arkhipov refused to give approval for use of the nuclear weapons, and the sub surfaced. Had he caved to the wills of the other 2 commanders on the Black Plague killed a massive amount of Europeans, changing the course of human history in culture, religion, medicine, etc. Hard to say if all those people survived, what family lines would have stayed and produced world-changing offspring. Taking this further, some political scientists argue that had the population not been culled so much by the plague, there would have never been modern democracy. Some claim that after the plague, the peasants held more power of their lords in feudal Europe because the workforce was so much smaller. This is a very paraphrased version of events. If any historians want to step in and fill in the blanks, be my guest. Another planet hitting the Earth when it was forming. Without that, the Earth wouldn't have enough mass to maintain a dense enough atmosphere to support complex life, like Mars, and there would also be no moon. I mean, if we're going to astronomical history, wouldn't creation be bigger? Discovery of fire. Cooked food freed up many hours in the day for other pursuits. It also provided fats for energy, enabling our brains to grow larger. The human brain uses 20% of the body's energy. The Norman conquest of England in 1066 has to be up there. It set into motion the rise of the British Empire, which shaped the modern world. It's not what I think. It's a known fact. The plow in Egypt. First time in human history, we had surplus food and could plan for the future, unlike any other animal on the planet. From here, all human civilization developed. The invention of writing. This literally took us from prehistory to history. Good call. The invention of vaccination. Just the fact that I am immune to various diseases that took millions of lives a century or 2 ago amazes me. The way anti-vaxxers are going, we are going to yo-yo on this one. The Columbian Exchange. So many cultures and species mixed. For instance, Earthworms didn't exist on North or South America before, and that completely changes the plant and wildlife composition. And that's only one of many changes. Worldwide diets changed. Europe was introduced to tomatoes, potatoes, tobacco, chocolate, the fall of the Inca and Aztecs, as well as the wipeout of countless other natives. I'm surprised I haven't seen it mentioned yet. I've seen several historians argue it was the most significant event to happen to the planet since the death of the dinosaurs. So many of the other events never ever occur with the exchange. Fall of the Roman Empire. Everything about Rome in general has so much impact on world history. Romance, Latin languages and cultures, Justinian law, Christian schism, even the Renaissance. Every European emperor who named their seats after Caesar or saw themselves as an heir to the Roman-Byzantine continuum and legacy. Come on, dude. What have the Romans ever done for us? Romans gave us cheese, and for that I am grateful. No pun intended. It might not be the biggest one, but the invention of the Haber process for nitrogen fixation is definitely up there. It's what allowed the production of artificial fertilizers on an industrial scale, which was a huge contributor to the massive spike in world population in the 20th century. Quite literally, billions of us would starve if it suddenly disappeared today. I think it's yet to be determined, but here are some highlights and lowlights. Invention of the printing press, invention of agriculture, Black Plague, atomic bombs dropped in Japan, discovery of antiseptic techniques, antibiotics. Will COVID and/or other current events make the list? I really fear that in 100 years, it's going to be 2016, the election of the current POTUS. I mean, the atomic bombs and their respective testing changed the world significantly, not to mention just the lives of the Japanese people. It even changed the makeup of material around the world, as far as the fact that there is different classifications for steel as to when it was produced and how much radioactive saturation there is in its makeup. Low background steel. Plus the whole nuclear arm race. Not sure if it's classified as a single event, but the late Bronze Age collapse of civilization undoubtedly set the world back hundreds of years of knowledge. To think, where would we be today if those civilizations didn't fade from existence? We'd have Mycenaean yogurt. As a Brit, the American Mutiny. Without that, we could have won both world wars. As an afterthought, we could all share Boris Johnson. A trouble shared is a trouble halved. I'm trying to think of a scenario where Central Powers win if America stays a colony. I guess an all-in on the U-boats? Or perhaps Britain sits out the war altogether? Who cares about Europe when you have most of North America? The number one event, no question, was Kowloon's invention of cheap, durable, and easily produced paper. Various similar materials existed before, such as papyrus, but lacked at least one of the aforementioned characteristics. The ability to store and transfer information on such a massive scale literally changed the world. Columbus setting up the beginnings of European colonies in America was also massively world-changing. Not necessarily always in a good way, mind you, but definitely a dramatic change. And the introduction of Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, and Confucianism all deserve a spot on the list. Other religions and philosophies grew and evolved over time, but those four in particular have a clear starting point brought on by a specific person. So much of what is comes from some ancient Abraham dude be like, pee-pee go snip snip. Columbus setting up the beginnings of European colonies in America was also massively world-changing. LOL. That's such a hilariously American-centric answer. Why? The destruction of the Library of Alexandria. Who knows where we would be knowledge-wise if that hadn't happened. Most of that knowledge had duplicates. There isn't a lot of lost knowledge from it. It was just the largest depository of information in the world. Not unique. What was believed to be was science fiction 30 years ago is now part of our daily lives, thanks to the internet. We have all of humanity's knowledge at our fingertips, and carry a computer in our pockets more powerful than those we used to send people to the moon. The scary thing is that we still don't know if the internet will ultimately change the world for better or worse. IMO, the internet has mostly changed the world for the worse, seeing what kind of people there are now and on forums. Birth of Christ and rise of Christianity. It left an indelible mark on Western culture. We even date things based around this event. I'm going to have to disagree with you. Without the resurrection of Christ, his birth would have been just another birth. Besides geological type events, probably the birth of Christ, you could also argue Muhammad, but I would argue Christ had more influence due primarily to predating Muhammad by 500 years. Whether or not you are a devoted Christian or an atheist, Christ's life and subsequent theology had profound impact on the world, not just on religion, art, education, colonialization. Burning of the Library of Alexandria. No telling how much knowledge we lost in that building, but we do know that anyone who visited had to give them information if they wanted to get in. Scholarly manuscripts, building techniques, as long as it was knowledge, they'd take it. And then it was all destroyed. So you are saying that the previous versions of the Twilight Saga were lost? And all 49 Shades of Grey too. 9/11. It totally changed the world's perspective of Muslims. Where I lived, it actually gave a lot of young people exposure to the Islamic world. Some of it was wildly inaccurate and based on empty political rhetoric of the time. To this day, I know grown-ass adults who believe one of the 5 pillars is jihad. Without 9/11, I'm nearly certain I would have made it to university before learning about things like the 5 pillars of Islam or the Quran. That's just how insular some parts of even the developed world are. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, a Soviet submarine found itself surrounded by American destroyers and dove to avoid being detected. They lost contact with Moscow due to the dive and did not hear anything for a number of days. An American ship started to drop some practice depth charges, which the sub believed were real depth charges. 2 of the 3 senior officers believed that war must have started and decided to launch a nuclear-tipped torpedo. Luckily, unanimous agreement between the 3 senior officers is needed, and the 3rd refused to agree, realizing that they may have not been actual depth charges. He calmed the captain and convinced him to surface to re-establish contact. If it was launched, it was very likely that it would have resulted in a global thermonuclear war. If not for this 3rd man, it would be a very different world we live in today. The one in 2035 random chimp event? We are not ready for that. The invention of cinnamon buns, also Rocky Road ice cream. The Bretton Woods Agreement. It was this agreement that gave us the longest period of peace and unparalleled prosperity and advancement in human history. Gives the best answer on this thread. The only reason, though, that I would disagree is that it's not really a single event but a cluster of massive outbreaks across several centuries. Great question. Alan Turing building the first computer. World War II. The result was so close at times it makes me wonder how sad it would have been if Germany won and how different the world would be. I don't think Germany ever stood a chance, especially after invading the Soviet Union. There was just no way they could sustain that. A better question is what would have happened had the US pilots not spotted the Japanese fleet at the last possible moment of midday. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Numerous historical figures and regimes and ideologies would never have happened. No World War I, no Lenin, no Bolsheviks, no collapse of the Hohenzollern, Habsburg, Romanov, and Ottoman empires, no Treaty of Versailles, no Mussolini and the fascists, no stock market crash of 1929, no Hitler and the Nazis, no Stalin, no Spanish Civil War, no World War II, no genocides in Eastern Europe. Also, due to no genocide of the Jews, the State of Israel is never founded. Thus, no Middle Eastern conflicts, no nukes.